There is something uncomfortable about seeing what others prefer not to see. Those who think clearly inevitably disturb others. Not by choice, but by nature. Most people live in a theater of appearances where applause is worth more than consistency. Those who decide to leave this stage and face the backstage of reality quickly discover that the price of lucidity is loneliness. It is not ignorance that frightens. It is the sharpness of the critical gaze. That is why so many who dare to question become targets of ridicule, distancing, or silence. Lucidity cannot be disguised. It exposes what is unresolved, and nothing threatens a fragile structure more than someone who refuses to participate in the charade. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this better than anyone. Instead of seeking solace in optimistic theories, he pointed to the raw root of existence, a blind, incessant force that moves us without direction or purpose. While others tried to give life a noble meaning, he preferred to face it as it is, full of noise, desire, and pain. For Schopenhauer, thinking seriously is not a gift. It is a burden. It is living awake in a world that begs for sleep. It is walking among people who smile fearfully and celebrate distractions so as not to face the void. The sincere thinker, no matter how kind he tries to be, becomes a threat. Not out of malice, but because his presence reveals too much. When someone dares to name what everyone avoids, they become a cracked mirror. And no one wants to see themselves through cracks. Most seek comfort, not truth. And when the truth arrives, it comes like an earthquake, not a hug. The courage to face reality is rare because it disrupts everything. It pulls the rug out from under society's sweeping of its contradictions. That is why the lucid are rejected. They illuminate what should remain hidden. This video offers no relief. It offers truth. And truth does not console. It summons. If you have come this far, perhaps you silently carry the same unease that once haunted Schopenhauer. The certainty that seeing clearly is often a punishment disguised as clarity. There is a kind of emptiness that cannot be explained, only felt. And the clearer the perception becomes, the more this abyss imposes itself. Living with lucidity is like carrying a mirror without a frame. Everything is reflected with brutal precision, without filters, without relief. Clarity offers no consolation. It only reveals. Schopenhauer understood this paradox with surgical coldness. In his view, consciousness does not bring liberation, but amplifies suffering. Deep thinking does not save. It only exposes the pains that most prefer to camouflage with routines and distractions. The more you see, the more you bleed. Loneliness, then, is not sought. It imposes itself, not by choice, but by incompatibility with an environment where shallow thinking reigns. Those who see beyond the surface become an uncomfortable presence, not because they say something wrong, but because they jeopardize the comfort of collective deception. In observing human beings as insatiable creatures driven by desires that follow one another without pause, Schopenhauer did not point to giving up, but to realization. The discomfort is not in wanting less, but in understanding too much. The stranger for him is the one who stops running and begins to understand why he is running. This kind of lucidity is received with coldness. There is no applause, only distancing. Exclusions are not declared, they are silent. Looks say more than words. Those who think too much do not need to say much. Their presence is already an indictment. The conscious are those who interrupt the artificial fluidity of coexistence with questions that no one wants to hear. They are the ones who, when placed in an environment, do not fit in. They destabilize. Not out of provocation, but out of authenticity. And authenticity, when it collides with habit, sounds like an affront. It is not a mistake. It is a threat to the shared illusion, to the structure built on ideas repeated without reflection. And in a culture that prefers echoes to questioning, Those who question become intruders. Schopenhauer knew early on, clarity comes at a price. Those who walk with the truth in their pockets walk alone, because the truth, when revealed, does not unite, it separates. Before being heard, those who think outside the box are targets of ridicule. They are seen as inconvenient, exaggerated, unsociable. Mockery serves as a shield, a defense mechanism used by those who fear the discomfort of lucidity. It is easier to laugh than to recognize the absence of meaning. But there is something worse than being isolated. It is accepting to remain sent in order to be included. At this point, many give in. Exchanging authenticity for acceptance, they suffocate their very essence in exchange for empty applause. They deny themselves in order to remain close to a collective that does not understand them. This is the trap, an environment shaped not to provoke questions but to feed repetition. Today's society does not value depth, it rewards imitation. Critical thinking disrupts, takes us out of our comfort zone, and is therefore avoided. From an early age, we learn to follow ready-made scripts. Memorize, obey, fit in. Doubt is not welcome. The audacity to question becomes a problem. And so a system is formed where the greatest virtue is not to disturb. Most act on reflex. They consume packaged ideas as if they were industrialized products. What is out of the ordinary is discarded without reflection. Those who ask too many questions are labeled as a threat, as if thinking differently were an offense. Schopenhauer understood this mechanism precisely. He did not see intelligence as an admired gift, but as a challenge to the status quo. In a world that demands submission, the free mind is always viewed with suspicion. Ignorance becomes a badge of honor. Consciousness becomes a disorder. What is valued is impulsive feeling, opinion without analysis, argument based on raw emotion. A theater where volume is worth more than coherence. In this scenario, thinkers do not distance themselves, they are distanced. Their restlessness contrasts with the comfortable surface that most have chosen to inhabit, where everything must be fast, shallow, and easy. Those who refuse to oversimplify are perceived as a burden. They don't fit in because they don't pretend, and not pretending in this world is unforgivable. Thinking requires effort, and effort is not popular. That is why, for so many, reflection is still a threat, and for a few, a vital necessity. It is easier to belong than to question. Repetition offers immediate shelter. Thinking, on the other hand, isolates. The collective embraces those who agree but expels those who insist on seeing beyond the surface. The desire to be accepted often outweighs the desire to understand. The illusion is seductive precisely because it intoxicates with quick answers, ready-made solutions, comforting promises. It doesn't matter if it's fragile, it just needs to work as anesthesia. Reality, on the other hand, requires strength. It does not accommodate, it demands demolition. It forces the individual to face their beliefs, their masks, their contradictions. It is no wonder that lies become bonds. They unite, generate apparent harmony, sustain a coexistence built on convenience. The truth, on the contrary, causes cracks. It separates, shakes certainties, disturbs bonds. Receiving the truth requires preparation, a kind of maturity that cannot be learned by osmosis. To embrace it, one must be willing to start over. And starting over means leaving behind old versions of oneself, often more comfortable versions. Schopenhauer knew that revelation does not happen without resistance. First, those who carry the truth are ridiculed. Then they are aggressively fought against. Only later, when time dissolves denial, do its echoes begin to be accepted. But this recognition comes late, and to few. Most cling to what comforts them. They choose the relief of lies over the discomfort of transformation. Those who dare to break this cycle pay dearly. They lose the familiarity of the group. the emotional stability of inherited certainties. They lose the peace of not knowing. But you gain something else: freedom. Not the freedom sold in slogans, but the freedom that comes from confronting reality. The freedom that comes after the collapse of illusions. It is a bitter paradox. The closer you get to lucidity, the greater the suffering, and at the same time, the greater the need not to retreat. Only those who face the pain of seeing without filters can build something that does not depend on masks. And it is at this point, when everything falls apart, that the real conflict begins. Not against others, but within oneself. The choice between pretending to fit in or accepting the truth and living with integrity, even if in silence. Living with awareness is paying a price that few can bear. It is not enough to think differently. You have to endure the consequences. Clarity does not just separate. It turns the lucid into a target. In environments shaped by repetition, the intellectual dissident becomes an anomaly. Those who observe deeply are perceived as a threat, not because they are wrong, but because their presence disturbs. Social order is not based on truth. It is sustained by balance, and balance is often just a shared illusion. Those who interrupt this collective theater, even in silence, commit an invisible crime. The figure who refuses to go along with social pretense is viewed with suspicion. Not for what they say, but for what they represent. Their gesture is read as an affront, their silence as judgment. They do not play the game, and for that reason they are excluded from the table. The consequence does not come in shouts, but in distancing. Lucidity does not provoke war, it provokes distance. A gaze that does not pretend is enough to make the group retreat. Those who see too much become uncomfortable even when they are silent. Over time, the wear and tear accumulates. Not because of direct rejection, but because of the constant tension of not fitting in. The thinker begins to hesitate, not because they have lost faith in what they see, but because of the exhaustion of always being misunderstood. The real danger is not in social exclusion. It is in self-betrayal. When the lucid person begins to adapt their speech, moderate their gaze, hide their concerns to preserve bonds, something inside them begins to die. Many faced with this choose to give up on themselves. They remain silent in order to be accepted. They fade into the background so as not to stand out, but the cost of this is too high. They lose their integrity. Schopenhauer understood this logic. He chose isolation not as defeat but as shelter. He did not withdraw out of pride, though. He withdrew to remain whole, because the more you perceive, the harder it is to belong. Lucidity transforms your gaze, and a gaze that penetrates the surface sees cracks that others pretend do not exist. Thinking differently is not just reasoning more deeply. It is carrying the weight of seeing what few are ready to admit. Remaining conscious amid widespread distraction requires more than clarity. It requires inner strength. Seeing what others avoid is like walking with a lit lantern in a hall of shadows. Everyone notices your presence, but they avert their gaze from the light, because illumination is uncomfortable, especially for those who prefer the comfort of darkness. What carries this clarity becomes uncomfortable. Not because it speaks loudly, but because it exists. And then the dilemma arises: how to remain attentive without wearing yourself out completely. The first step is to abandon the idea that there will be recognition. Expecting acceptance from an environment designed to avoid depth is a sure recipe for disappointment. Sharp thinking needs internal space, not external applause. It needs silence, not an audience. Schopenhauer understood this early on. Instead of waging war against indifference, he sought refuge in seclusion, in written words, in sounds that require no explanation, in landscapes that demand no adaptation. He realized that the mission is not to convert the collective, but to protect oneself from it. Because trying to awaken those who have chosen to remain asleep is not generosity. It is exhausting and often dangerous. The group rejects those who dare to reflect its true image. Those who think too much need to learn to conserve energy, not out of selfishness but out of wisdom. Lucidity requires strategy. In a time saturated with noise, silence becomes a shield. But it is not absence, it is subtle presence, a fertile space where thoughts germinate without needing to be exposed at every moment. The silence of the lucid is not escape, it is soil, a reserved field where ideas mature far from haste and judgment. There is no need to prove anything, just to be. Accepting distance as a consequence of fidelity to one's own vision is part of the journey. Not as punishment, but as a sign that one has not bowed to appearances. There is no glory in this, but there is relief. And that relief turns into rest, a rest that does not depend on the approval of others. A rare kind of freedom, that of remaining whole, even if it costs companionship. At the height of the estrangement, something unexpected begins to blossom. It is not comfort, it is not immediate relief. It is a silent clarity that springs from the rubble. After the collapse that truth causes, a kind of freedom emerges that cannot be granted, only earned. The revelation does not bring peace at first, it devastates. It tears apart certainties, undoes identities, collapses everything that sustained the old perception of the world. That is the reason for the pain, and also the reason why so many prefer to remain in illusion. But what comes next, when the dust settles and the noise disappears, is different. A serenity that does not depend on anyone. A reunion with one's own axis. An intimate alliance that is only born when one survives the abyss of thought. Schopenhauer knew that suffering is not an accident of life. It is the very mechanism of life. Understanding this is what differentiates lucidity from simple disillusionment. Seeing the world without filters is a lonely journey, but also the only route to a true existence. This freedom cannot be defined by words, nor does it need to be displayed. It is felt in silence, in not needing to convince anyone. In the end of the search for validation, to be lucid is to walk with visible wounds among faces that disguise their own pain. It is to refuse to smile for convenience. It is to remain awake amid the charade. And even feeling the weight of separation, not wanting to return to collective torpor. Because once you see, there is no turning back. The lie loses its shine, the illusion its effect. The truth is frightening, but then it teaches you to breathe differently. The rejection of the majority is not a sign of error. It is confirmation that you have broken the mold, and those who break free from the mold do not become disoriented. They reveal themselves, they find themselves. If these words resonate with you, perhaps you are walking the same path. And if you are, know this: you are not alone. Write in the comments, "I prefer the pain of truth to the comfort of lies." If you want to continue receiving reflections that go beyond the surface and reach the essential, subscribe, activate notifications, and share this video with those who also walk with their eyes open.